Hello. In this lesson, we are going to talk about determining slope from an equation. This lesson is a continuation from the lesson that Mr. Warnock just recorded. It is also very similar to the lesson that Mrs. Warnock recorded. So keep in mind, all of these lessons from Chapter 4 are very similar. They all build on each other. So we are first going to just review and talk again about slope-intercept form and what the slope is. I know you already filled this out with Mr. Warnock, but we do need to talk about it again. So first thing, slope-intercept form is always in the form y equals mx plus b. That is the form that you always have to have it in. You've already talked about how to get things into slope-intercept form, and you've already talked about how to go from a scenario to slope-intercept form. We're going to do more of that today, but with different forms. M is always your slope. Our M is always next to X in an equation. And I know Mr. Warnock had you write that in your notes, so make sure you have down that M is always the number in front of X when it's in slope-intercept form. Slope is always going to be a simplified fraction. So slope is always a fraction, or of course, if it's not a fraction, it's a whole number. So it's always a fraction or a whole number. Let me change this to the word or. So again, slope is always m. It's always the number in front of x in slope-intercept form. It must be a simplified fraction or a whole number. Okay, so now that we've went over that again and you know that, we are going to do some examples. So the directions here say, given the following equations in slope-intercept form, we need to identify the slope. We also need to come up with a scenario to represent each equation. Okay, so this is the fun part. You get to be a little bit creative when coming up with your scenarios. So let's first look at the equation. First thing that you want to ask yourself is the equation in slope-intercept form? So when you look at this, it is in y equals mx plus b form. Slope is always either a fraction or a whole number, and it's always next to x. So you should see that your slope is right here. It's a whole number, but every whole number always has a 1 on the bottom. So the first thing I want you to do is write down your 2 over 1 for your slope, which we also can call the rate of change. And I'm going to keep that long line there because we're going to end up putting our words there after we write the scenario for what the slope actually means. Okay, now that you have your slope written down, we need to write a scenario. So y equals 2x minus 5. When you're writing a scenario, you always want to start with the number right here. This is always our starting point. Okay, so I'm going to help you with this one. We could say something like, Miss Scaliato lost $5. And the reason I said I lost $5 is this 5 is negative. So we could say Miss Scaliato lost $5. And then the 2 is positive. That's our rate of change. So I'm going to say, and earns $2 every 1 day. The 2 over 1, our slope is positive. Okay, so I'm going to earn $2 every 1 something. In this case, I chose day. I could have also said I found $2 every 1 week or $2 every 1 month. Just make sure if it's positive that you're earning it, you're finding it, something along those lines. So again, in your scenario, start with this number, the second number here that's by itself, that's the constant, that's your starting point. And then your slope is your rate of change. It's the quantity that is changing. So I earned $2 every 1 day. After we write our scenario, We want to then go back to the problem and put that into the problem. So 2 over 1, we have $2. We know that was our rate every 1 day. So for these ones, I want you to go back to the slope and fill in from your scenario what the slope meant in words. 2 what over 1 what? Okay, hopefully that one makes sense. We're going to do a couple more of these together. Feel free to try one on your own if you would like. Okay, number 2, y equals negative 3/5 x plus 7. The first thing, ask yourself, is this in slope-intercept form? So when you look at this equation, it is in y equals mx plus b form. This is a fraction, okay, the number in front of x, and it is simplified. And this is always just a number here, this 7 or whatever it might be. Once you realize it's in y-intercept, slope-intercept form, find the slope. It's always the number in front of x. So take that number in front of x, negative 3 over 5. Write that down, but since we're going to write a scenario, leave a line there. Okay, after you find your slope, which is that number in front of x, let's write our scenario. So going back to slope-intercept form, always start with that second number that's just there, okay? So this time that second number is positive. So you want to say something like I have, or she has, or they have, okay, because it's positive. So I'm going to say Skylar has, because it's positive, 7 cookies. Okay, there are currently 7. Now, if we go to the slope rate of change, we do not have to put a 1 on the bottom of it this time because it is a reduced fraction. It's negative this time, so now our rate of change, she's going to be losing something, eating something, getting rid of something, something along those lines where it means that it's negative. Okay, so if she has 7 cookies, I'm going to say, and she eats 3 every 5 days. So she eats 3, this fraction's negative. This is always your rate of change every 5 days. And I know Mr. Warnock went over these a lot with you, so I'm not going to go into too much detail. We started with she has 7 cookies because that's positive, and then she's eating 3 every 5 days. Okay, remember your time is always the bottom of your slope. This is always our x. So it's always going to be how often she's doing it or they are doing it. So if she has 7 cookies and eats 3 every day, we need to fill in our slope up here with words. So negative 3 what over 5 what? I want you to write down what you think that is. So it's negative 3 cookies because eats what? Well, we know she's eating cookies. So negative 3 cookies over 5 days. Remember, bottom is always x, that's always our time. So just make sure you go back and fill in your slope. Okay, let's go to number 3. Let's do one more of these together, and then I'm going to go to the next section. Okay, number 3. Y equals negative 4x plus 8. First ask yourself, is this equation in slope-intercept form? It is. It's in y equals negative 4x plus 8. Let's identify m, which is our slope. M is always in front of x. So here's our number in front of x. Since it's a whole number, please put a 1 on the bottom of it. So our slope is negative 4 over 1. Okay, after you write your slope down, leave the line there so we can fill in the words. Let's write a scenario about this equation. So starting with the constant, so this number right here, always start with that. It's positive. So something that you have or that someone has, it has to be positive. Okay, so I'm going to use, let's say it is 8 degrees outside. So that's positive. It's a positive 8 degrees outside. Now, our rate of change or our slope is negative. So we need to say something about the temperature going down or dropping because it's negative. So if it's currently 8 degrees outside, I'm going to say, and it drops 4 degrees every 1 day. That one on the bottom is extremely important that you add that into your scenario. So it starts with positive. It's 8 degrees outside. Our slope or rate of change was negative. So it's dropping 4 degrees every 1 day. Go ahead and fill in the slope, the words that you know go next to it. Okay, so -4 what? Hopefully you have -4 degrees over 1 day. So -4 what? -4 degrees because it's dropping. How often? Every 1 day. Okay, I want you to try example number 4 and 5 in that section. When we come around to check notes, I want to make sure that you have that done. Number 5, be careful with, and I want to flip to that real quick. There's a negative in front of the x, and I'm sure you heard this on the previous video. That negative, there's really a 1 between the negative and the x. So your slope is dropping, okay? Or you're losing something. -1 over 1. So for number 5, make sure you add that 1 in there so you don't forget if there's a negative sign in front of x, there's really a 1 there. So again, try 4 and 5. When we come around to check notes, we will make sure that you guys have that done. Write a scenario, find the slope with labels. Okay, let's go to the second part of this page. This is still page 6 in your notes. Okay, we're looking at number 1. So second part, let's take a look at number 1. Okay, number 1, so the direction, actually, let me read the directions first. The directions say, given the following equations in standard form, rearrange them so it's in slope-intercept form, then identify the slope of the equation. So first, I'm going to ask you, just looking at number 1, can you tell me what the slope is, just from looking at number 1? Okay, I hope you're thinking about that. And I hope you said no, you cannot find the slope in number 1. The slope is not 4. Yeah, I know that's the number in front of x, but this is not in slope-intercept form. It is in standard form, okay? You need to make sure it's in slope-intercept form before you tell me or write down on homework or a test what the slope is. It has to be in y equals mx plus b form. So how do we do this? Mrs. Warnock in her video talked about going from slope-intercept to standard form, and she gave you a template with steps. Well, I'm going to give you the same thing, but now going from standard form to slope-intercept form. So I want you to write down either at the top or the side of that paper these 2 steps, and make sure you put at the top going from standard form to slope-intercept form. Remember, standard form is always in the form ax plus by equals c. These numbers cannot be fractions or decimals. So the a, b, and c, no fraction, no decimal. And I'll write that down here. And the a has to be positive. So just that A has to be positive. Just keep that in mind. I know Mrs. Warnock went over that. So here's the steps. Step 1, to go from standard to slope-intercept form. You add, subtract the x to the right side of the equation. So write down add, if you haven't already, add, subtract x to the right side of the equation. Step 2, divide by the number in front of y. Divide by the number in front of y. Okay, now for these steps to work, of course we have to make sure it's in the correct standard form before we go through and convert it and use these. So it has to be in correct standard form for this to work. Okay, so let me now flip back to the first example. Let's use those steps. First thing you want to ask yourself before converting to slope-intercept form is this in the correct standard form? Well, it is. It's in ax plus by equals c. None of these are fractions or decimals. Okay? So we can go right to our steps and follow the steps that you just wrote down. Step 1, add or subtract the x to the right side of the equation. So to get 4x to the other side, we have to do the opposite. So we have to subtract it. So minus 4x on both sides. We are going to rewrite it. So we have 7y equals, please always write the x term first. So negative 4x plus 12. Always write that x term first. So that was step 1. Step 2, divide by the number in front of y. The number in front of y is 7. So we need to divide not just one thing, but every single term needs to be divided by 7. This goes away. Okay, that's canceled. So now we have y equals negative 4/7 x. Okay, this fraction negative 4/7, it's already simplified. Slope has to be written as a simplified fraction or a whole number. Now plus, this is 12 divided by 7. Do not leave it like that. This number always has to be changed to a decimal or leave it as a whole number. So if you take your calculator and do 12 divided by 7, we're going to put 1.7, because you get 1.7 when you divide that. So again, the slope always has to be a simplified fraction. Your y-intercept, if it is a fraction, please change it to a decimal. It will make it easier when we get in time for graphing. So please convert that. Okay, there's slope-intercept form. So we've converted it. So now what we need to do is identify the slope of the equation. Slope is always represented by m, and slope is always the number in front of x. So in this case, here's our slope. We're not going to write a scenario for this one, so I just want you to write down that the slope is negative 4/7. Okay, let's go to number 2. Okay, number 2, we have negative 3x minus 5y equals 15. First question you want to ask yourself before you put it into slope-intercept form is this in the correct standard form? So you ask yourself, okay, well, are the a, b's, and c's fractions or decimals? They're not. Then you ask yourself, well, is that first term, is this term positive? It's not. Since that is not positive, the very first thing you need to do is get rid of the negative. To get rid of the negative, you have to divide every single term by negative 1. So divide every term by negative 1. That will get rid of this negative. So we have 3x plus 5y, because negative 5y divided by negative 1 is positive. It's equal to negative 15. Now you're in the correct standard form. So now all we do is follow the 2 steps that you wrote on your paper. So now we need to get it into y equals form. We're trying to get this y by itself again. Step 1, add or subtract the x from both sides. So in this case, we're subtracting it. You want to do the opposite to get it to the other side. Rewrite the positive 5y. And we're still trying to get this y all by itself. So circle or highlight or bold it. Equal to, you need to write the x term first. Drop down the minus 15. So always write the x term first. Drop down the minus 15. Step 2, get rid of the number in front of y. So we need to divide every term by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. So we have y equals negative 3/5 x. That is already simplified. And then this part right here, negative 15 divided by 5 is negative 3. Now, of course, that one's not a decimal. That's going to happen where it's just a whole number. So our slope-intercept form is y equals negative 3/5 x minus 3. Okay, last part is identify slope. So the number in front of x is always slope or rate of change, which is represented by m. So negative 3/5 is our slope. Okay, I hope this is making sense. I know you did some of this with Mr. Warnock in the first lesson, so hopefully this is getting easier. Okay, let me start you off with number 3, and then I want you guys to also finish this one. So just starting number 3 with you, and then you need to finish it, is ask yourself first, is this in the correct standard form? Okay, if you ask yourself that, I hope you're saying no. Because this here is a fraction, it is not in correct standard form. So we need to get rid of that fraction first. Okay, to get rid of the fraction, Mrs. Warnock did this with you a little bit. We need to multiply the entire equation by the denominator. So to get rid of the fraction, we have to multiply every term by the denominator. The denominator is 2. So this is my little multiplication symbol, just so you don't get confused. If you multiply everything by 2, that will give us the correct standard form. So this will become 20x. 1/2 times 2 is 1. So these 2's cancel. Minus 1y equals 20 times 2 is 40. So your first step is getting rid of the fraction. To get rid of the fraction, multiply every term by the bottom of it. At this point, it's your job. I want you to follow those 2 steps we just did on 1 and 2. Put this into slope-intercept form and also identify what m is. So we will be checking 4 and 5 from the top and this number 3 to make sure you did this on your own. I hope this video makes sense. If not, feel free to come see one of us so we can clarify anything you're confused on.